Hi everyone. Yep, I think we're live. Hi everyone, welcome to Chalchitra Talks. मेरा नाम वाणी है and welcome to yet another episode of the Under Root VM Squared show. And I'm particularly excited about this. Okay, wait, I'm getting a call. I am so sorry about that. But yes, I'm so excited about the stream for a lot of reasons. The call kind of. Okay. But I'm very excited about this stream because I have been looking forward to it for quite some time now. And yeah, so there is a big story to it. There used to be this handle that I discovered in 2020. It's called Blackout Literature. And if you guys don't follow it already, you definitely should. Because I think it kind of made my year 2020 bearable. And I was kind of worried because in between nobody was posting on the handle, but that's when I discovered the person who runs the handle. And today we have that person with us. Hi Krishna Rani and hi Prishika. I'm so glad you guys are here. Do like the stream so that it gets recommended to more people. You just know how the YouTube algorithm works, right? So do recommend it and do like, share, and subscribe and share it with everyone you're watching. And if you love books, you're going to love this episode. I hope so. And because the guest for tonight is someone I think is one of my, or is actually my most favorite Insta handle, Bookstagram, as you call it. So without wasting any time, I'll just invite the individual. His name is Steven, and he's here with us. Hi, Steven. Can you? I think you.
Hello,
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I am
It's
so
really good to be here.
Yeah, same here. I'm so happy we can finally do this. Like, it's not, I'm sorry, I'm
Yes,
stammering a little because I got a phone call at the beginning and then I just lost my flow. But
that's okay, it happens.
yeah. How are you? How was your day?
I am well, thank you. I mean, my day has been good, quite relaxed. I'm actually on holiday now, so I didn't have that much to do, and I was just looking forward to talking with you here today. That's pretty much been the goal of my day going towards this. Yeah.
Nice. I actually love your Instagram handle and I have to ask you about the aesthetics. How do you how did you actually start posting? How did the idea of blackout literature come to you?
I I mean, I actually so I'm always interested in taking little bits of literature. I don't really know how the idea formed, but at one point I was just like, it would be cool if I could just focus on, this one sentence or one part. And I thought I would take a picture and see if there would be a way to sort of cross out, I mean, I didn't want to do it by hand because I have lots of things to do. But I thought, if there's a way to kind of highlight or remove some part of the text and really showcase, highlight one part of it, then that would be cool. And it turns out that my iPhone has the standard app, which is able to do that. So I started just playing around with it and taking pictures of some of my favorite passages and from what I was reading. And that's kind of how it happened. Yeah.
Nice. Do you also like I've hmm So do people also reach out to you for I don't know from book recommendations and blackout literature? How does like do you decide I'm so sorry. I'll try to reframe it. So how do you decide what is like how you're not very regular on blackout literature, right? So do you have like a posting schedule or do you just like see a good passage and that's when you post it?
No, I'm actually very bad at it. And I have to say, it's been sometimes where people have written me and they said, like, oh, are you still posting? I'm looking forward to your post, something like that. That's when I've sort of remembered because it's not my main account. So it's quite small and I really like it. But with things getting in the way, work and other things, I just kind of forget about it, but every time I realize and remember, I get excited about it, and it's either from something that I'm currently reading. I'm I think, well, this is something that would be nice to share on there, or I just go through some books that I know and love where I can find something cool to post, basically.
Nice. And how important are aesthetics to you? Because both your accounts are beautiful to look at, like Blackout Literature and your main account as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is important to me, but it's not something that's conscious in a sense. I mean, with the blackout literature, of course, I'm a
Mm.
perfectionist, so I want everything to be symmetrical, and so but it's just kind of the natural way that I work, just putting care into things, and I think it sort of comes from that. The aesthetics of my main account, for instance, also are just kind of a very natural process of just taking a picture. I take pictures of books, and I already think, books are beautiful enough. You just need a good bit of light and maybe a nice filter, and that's about it. So I try to kind of keep it minimal in that sense. And I respect people who spend a lot of time on Instagram coming up with all sorts of fancy things, but to me, it's not really
Yeah.
necessary. Yeah.
So, are you also like, so when I looked at your Instagram handle, this is what my perception was that you'll be very zen, you're very calm in real life as well. It takes probably a number of things to agitate you. Is that actually true?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. I would say so. I mean, I'm kind of a quiet person. I like to just live quietly, and um, yeah, I don't think I get upset very easily. So that's about right, I suppose. I mean, I can get angry. I mean, we all can, but in
Yeah.
general, no. I mean, I think it's good to be reasonable and calm and not let yourself get swept up in whatever emotion you might be feeling in the moment. Yeah.
Has that always been the case, or do you also have any tricks like maybe a calming ritual or anything? Like, what are your daily rituals in that sense to not to just have a slow day?
I mean, I think I'm not sure if I have any rituals, but it's a kind of self-awareness, I think, within the moment where you see yourself potentially reacting in different ways. And at the background of that, maybe there's a question of, okay, what kind of person do I want to be? And maybe, I'm spelling it out a bit too much now. It's not so self-conscious, but I feel like that's, that question in general, I mean, I'm a philosopher and I'm an ethicist, so I think about, what is good, what is bad, and I think the question of what kind of person do I want to be is very important. So, to me, kind of giving in to like anger and outrage and so on is just it's kind of ugly, and I don't necessarily want to be someone who is who gives into that. So I kind of just think, in those moments, how am I going to respond? And even just taking a step back like that, it makes you less likely to really give in to the moment and the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, before we started, we were talking about Maria Popova's pockets of stillness. What
Right.
are those pockets of stillness for you that just help you unwind?
I mean, I guess two things probably. I love to go for walks, and so just in the neighborhood, and there's some parks around, and just kind of going there, maybe petting some neighborhood cats, and I kind of know all the cats around, and just kind of walking, looking at things, interacting with the world. That's something to me while listening to music. That's an important way to unwind. So I would say that's one. And the second would be reading, and especially the very quiet moments where I'm just kind of reading, either on the couch with my cat, or I always read before I sleep. So definitely, late at night when I'm in bed reading, that's a very
Right.
calm moment. Yeah.
Right. Do you also have any, are there any habits that you have, do you have anything that you think is the worst advice on reading that people give to each other?
Um,
Yeah.
yes. So, I mean, I often, I mean, there's this question of, oh, you want to read a lot. People sometimes say, oh, you read so much. How do you read so much? And I think the most important thing is just quite simple. You have to make time for it. And you basically can't wait for the moment that you're going to have time to read, in a sense, right? It's going to depend on how busy you are really. But if you can get into a kind of routine, for instance, always reading before you go to sleep,
Yeah.
that's a way to kind of increase the amount that you read, and also to create that moment for yourself to read.
Is there like, what do you think is the worst advice that people give to each other when it comes to reading? Like, I personally think, are you okay with people dropping out in the middle of reading books? Like, I picked up a book. I couldn't get through by the third page, and then I'm like, hey, I'll just read it later. I'll come back to it. Are you able to do that? Would you recommend it to people?
So in general, I'm not a person who would ever sort of try to dictate what other people should do, especially when it comes to reading, because to me, freedom is about freedom. And you have to sort of find your way in it. And in a sense, in and through reading, you become who you you become a kind of person, and you find sort of your way in reading if you take it seriously, as I think many people do. So I think you have to find your own way. If you really get to a point where you feel I'm not going to appreciate this book, it's a waste of time. I'm finding myself struggling. It's making me feel bad. I don't want to do it anymore. Then I would say, then just put it down. You can either pick it up again or not. I mean, no one is going to hold you accountable, I don't think. Maybe unless you're in a book club, which is another thing. Yeah.
Were you always a reader, or was there any changing point in your life that really got you into reading?
Yeah. So I actually recently wrote about this, so which is nice. So it's kind of fresh in my mind, having thought about it. But no, I mean, so as a kid, I loved to read, but what I did is I would just read the same sort of books over and over again. Stories kind of more adventure and also more serious, but mostly it was just, about the story. And so I would do that. I would just sometimes even I had some favorite books that I would read, finish it, and then the next day I would start it again and want to read it again. So it was always like that. But then during my studies, I didn't have enough time really to read fiction, or it wasn't so. And we go back to this, making time for it. I wasn't making time for it. Then it was only later when I sort of rediscovered that I could read on my own at any point, right? Because I always read a lot for school because I love that. But yeah, so definitely always into reading. Are we
I
having some
think there is
technical
some.
issues?
I, yeah, I think it's my internet. I think it's my internet.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, okay, wait. I'll just try to. Yeah, I think it should be good now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so sorry. I kind of broke your flow. But yes.
No, that's very okay. I mean, did you hear what I said, though? I mean, I'm happy to repeat it, but
I
as
think
long
I
as it was
missed
clear.
the last. I think I missed the last part, um, which was, yeah.
No, I think I just pointed out that I always loved to read in school. I mean, so I did the IB, International Baccalaureate, for my high school. I grew up in
Mm.
different countries as a kid. I went to English and American international schools. So I did IB and I did higher level English, and we had to read just a huge number of books. But I always loved it. And some of the parents complained that it was too much, but I didn't really feel that it was too much. But, you need to have a certain kind of personality, I think, even early on, to really appreciate reading. Yeah, and it can change, though. I definitely think it can change. People who never like to read can suddenly discover reading, which is great. Yeah.
That's nice. And what is the book that you like to gift people the most? Is there, I'm so sorry, is there a lag from my end, or is it the internet is all fine, right? You can
I don't
hear me.
think so. I can hear you well now.
Great.
Yeah.
What is the book that you like to gift people the most?
Probably The Idiot by Dostoevsky, but it's
Okay.
only, so I would say only for special people, I have to say, because it's the first book that really rekindled my love for literature. I read, I think it was in the last year of my bachelor's degree. Um, I just went to a bookstore, just bought a bunch of classics to read them, and The Idiot was the first one that I read, and I just thought, wow, I want to read everything great that has been written, all the classics. Basically just read the most beautiful literature and documents of the human condition that there are. So I mean, that's a very meaningful book to me. Also because of the book itself
Yeah.
and the message. But yeah, so that's the one I would say.
Nice. And is there a video lag for me? I just don't know. I'll just try moving.
I'm sorry. No, for me it's fine. So I don't know if it's my internet, but I see and hear you well, and there doesn't seem to be a lag.
Great, great. So I think it's my internet. But in any case, I'll just continue. Uh,
Yes.
is there any book that you'd like to recommend to people who are just getting started with reading? There's this book that I recently read. It's called The Velocity of Being. Again, it's by Maria Popova, and it's about letters that people have written to kids, I think. I'm presuming, like people
Mm,
who want to take up reading. And
right.
I think it's a beautiful book that anyone can pick up if they want to start reading or get into it. Is there any book that you can recommend people who are just starting out or are not into reading that much, but they want to read more?
Um, So, I mean, in general, I'm inclined to say no, because reading is something that is very personal. It depends on the personality of the person you're, recommending something for.
Yeah.
Some people are going to fall in love with Kafka, when they read it. Other people are going to be bored. Some people are going to read A Thousand Years of Solitude by Marquez and think, that's amazing, and other people are unable to finish it. So it's kind of difficult. But I would say, I think when someone wants to get into reading, what's important is to give them a book that's, it's going to keep their attention enough. Um, maybe I can. So my brother is someone who he likes to read, but he doesn't really do it. And I can maybe give the example of him. I think I recommended 1984 to him to read it, and that was a book that he loved. And I think that kind of book where it's not just a good story, but there's sort of a significance to it, something you can sort of see in society, in your life. I feel like that is probably what is going to make people interested in reading, to sort of discover more like that.
Do you also think that everyone should pick up all kinds of books? I used to stick to literature at one point, and then I realized that I need to get into more books, say philosophy or maybe nonfiction and anything. It just helps you widen your perspective. But what if someone is not at all interested in reading something? Would you still recommend it to them? Like, is it okay to not read one particular section or have prejudice against it?
I mean, so first of all, as a philosopher, I have to say that everyone needs to be reading philosophy all the time. You understand that. I couldn't give you any other answer. Um, no, no, there's way too much pressure from people for other people to read things. So I would say no. And again, it's related to this question of, what kind of person do you want to be? I mean, if you just want to read nice stories, nice books, kind of beach reads because it's a kind of entertainment. That's fine. I mean, you don't need to, but I'm a very kind of, in that sense, tolerant. I would definitely encourage people to read history because I think it's very important. I would encourage them to try to read some philosophy, some psychology. There's lots of popular psychology books out there that are just fascinating to read. Anyone, learning about behavior and about sort of the systematic things that people do and that they themselves do. I think everyone can learn something and many people are going to be interested. Um, so I don't think that everyone should be reading everything. No, again, also because in freedom is sort of, to me, is a condition, a necessary condition for reading. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I think what started happening to me last year was like, so I started a book club this year on the channel, and we pick up one book each month and we go through with it the entire
Yeah.
month. We read together, and on in the last week of the month we discuss the book and then we reveal the book for the next month. But I started it initially because I was like, hey, there's one book that I'm going to dedicatedly read for a month. But
Hmm.
what actually triggered it was because last year I got so much into pressure. Everyone around me was posting like, "Hey, I finished 132 books this year. Hey, I finished reading like 222 books this year." And I was like, "Hey, I'm still at like probably my 40th book." It's so much pressure.
Hmm.
And there was also this thing like everyone reads what is just incoming. I mean, I know the book is out, but I haven't read it. I probably might not pick it up, but you feel guilty for not being a part of that. It's sort of like FOMO, fear of missing out in whatever they're
Yeah.
reading. Does that happen with you as well? Like, hey, I'm picking up these books, but I'm not able to read those books.
no, my nature is entirely opposed to that kind of form of pressure. I mean, to me, reading is just about it's about discovering things. If everyone's talking about something, it's less interesting to me because I feel like I'm not really going to discover anything. So for me, the most interesting thing is to find amazing literature that's basically been forgotten, authors who are brilliant, who just, yeah, I mean, people who aren't being read by people. So it's a very, so that whole yeah, I don't really understand. I mean, I understand it, from just a psychological, sociological perspective, that people want to, read things and do things that other people are talking about. But for me personally, that's not something
How do
that
you
affects me. Yeah.
get out of it? Like, what would you recommend if, say, for example, I don't go through that. Okay, I think I still go through that at times when I'm not conscious.
Mhm.
But what would you recommend someone who is just going through that and is not able to, again, concentrate on what they're reading? Because there's constantly this bug, like, hey, I'm not reading that thing that has just come out. Everyone else is.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what would be good advice. I mean, because it's easy to say, be more confident in yourself, or, believe in your own ability to be interested in things that are interested because you're interested in them, right? I mean, um, other people, I mean, there's lots of things other people are interested in that, you don't necessarily have to be interested in. But I'm trying to think, okay, what would my advice be? I mean, so I think we're talking about two things, right? So there's sort of the content of what is being read,
Mm.
that sort of seems to be going around, and then everyone feels like they should be weighing in on it, right? To have an opinion about it, to have read it. But there's also this pressure to maybe read a lot, right? Which you also sort of mentioned in terms of how
Yeah.
many books. Um, I mean, for me, that's it's a very similar situation, because how much you read is very much also should be a function of how much reading do you want to do, and at which point are you satisfied. um, and it should be based on, on your own goals, and not on the goals of other people. Again, this is very easy to say, but yeah, it's more difficult to implement. I'll keep thinking about this as we talk. Maybe I'll have some more advice later. It's difficult to give advice when it's not an issue that I'm necessarily dealing with myself, but I understand it very well.
Do you also have any bad reading habits? Like habits that you'll say, oh, this is something I really do not get and I really want to work on it. Or maybe something you're not working on, but like you're just conscious, like, hey, I do this and it's not good when it
I
comes to you.
mean, okay, I actually thought of something. At first, I mean, I was no, but yes. I used to be very much a reading one book at a time kind of person. Actually, so this is going to lead to some advice, maybe, for what it's worth. I used to be a reading one book at a time person. I still think, ideally, in an ideal world, you read one book at a time. It has your full attention. You're fully absorbed in it, right? I very quickly moved away from that to the point where I'm just reading so many things at the same time. It's partly because, for my PhD, and other things I'm working on, I just need to be reading it. But I mean, that's kind of, I mean, it's also an excuse in a sense, because I could finish it first. But I somehow got into the habit of just reading so many things at the same time. Um,
Yeah.
it might be a bad habit, but a bit of advice. In a sense, if you want to maximize, how much you read, it's actually a good strategy, right? Because you're not necessarily always going to be, sorry, in the mood for certain things. So rather than, I'll just drink for a moment.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah.
Yes, sorry about that. No, so you're not always going to be in the mood for certain things. Rather than just give up on what you're reading, if you can switch to something different that maybe holds your interest at that time, in a sense, you're maximizing your reading. So what I do, I'm definitely, I always read literature. So that's an ongoing, every day I go from one book to the next. It's kind of the thread through my existence, I suppose. But then I'm always reading at least one book of nonfiction. And I keep, one book of poetry next to my bed, for instance, and usually I'll read just a little bit of poetry at night. So by sort of keeping different books ready at hand for when you're in the mood for different things, I think that's a way that you can sort of, in the long term, not in the short term, but in the long term, read more.
Do you also have corners assigned to your books? Like when I sit, like for example, I have a book that I read on my desk there is a book that's next to my bed, so I know when I go to sleep, this is where I'll read this book.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I keep books all over the place. But I mean, I have a little stack of books here on my desk. I have next to my bed for sure, on my kitchen table. That's become kind of like
Yeah.
another bookshelf. Yeah, just keep them close, I guess, for whenever you want to pick them up. Keep
What
them
are
in your
you?
bag as well for when you go
Yeah.
out, right? If you're waiting for the bus. I mean, if you're any moment you have time, you can read.
Do you also read ebooks or do you just stick to paperbacks?
So I got into that a while ago, but only because there were a lot of obscure books that I managed to find PDFs of. And I wanted to, read them, but I found that it's not really for me. I very much understand it. I'm not really a book snob in that sense that I think, no one should be reading from e-readers. I know e-readers can be really good in getting people to read as well. I know my father got an e-reader and now he's reading a lot more just because it's very easy to kind of buy books in the store, right, and just get them all there, as opposed to having to go to the library order them. So I think there are lots of advantages, and it's good. But for me, no, I mean, material books are really the thing.
Are you also into audiobooks? Do you like that trend coming in?
I mean, again, if we're talking about maximizing, if you want to read a book while you're driving, which maybe you shouldn't actually do because it's quite distracting. I mean, the way I understand it, I haven't done that. But if you're vacuuming or you're cooking and you want to listen to a book, I mean, that's great. Again, I don't really do that. So I don't have experience there, but I see the appeal in some cases.
Do you also listen to podcasts? We spoke about audiobooks, but do you also listen to podcasts?
Yeah, so I mean, I do not as much anymore, also because I've been working from home for such a long time now, and it was really when I was traveling that I to and from work, it was quite a long distance, and then if you're in the bus, I get kind of nauseous reading in the bus. I mean, I kind of pushed through near the end, after about 2 or 3 months, I think, of really trying, I managed to not feel so nauseous. But I mean, that's a perfect time for podcasts, if you're kind of
Yeah.
in the train or moving about. So yeah, I mean, I have this one of the podcasts that was probably the first that I ever listened to. It's called Philosophy Bites, and they're very short interviews by leading philosophers, Nigel Warburton and David Edmonds. They interview sort of experts in the field just on subjects. Maybe it's something about free will or really anything. Can we blame people in the past, for things they did in certain historical periods? I don't know. I mean, all these sort of very interesting, relevant little talks. And I mean, I would listen to them just all the time. There's lots of them. Yeah.
Nice. Do you what are you do you also said that you read nonfiction. What are your most favorite, like what are the nonfictions that you'd like to recommend?
Uh, I mean, it's so nonfiction is a very broad category, of course. I mean, one thing that I love to read is just essays on literary criticism. Um, I mean, I love James Wood. He has a couple I mean, I have him. So back there is actually one of the sections that I have on literary criticism. Um, I have James Wood, a bunch of books over there. So he writes, I think, for the New Yorker and a bunch of other. But I mean, he has the collections of essays, and they're just brilliant on, all sorts of writers, and he has a really good way of engaging with them.
Nice. Do you also
That's
read
one.
like self-help or maybe, yeah. What's your
Mhm.
opinion of self-help or like other books that come here?
I mean, I have opinions about it. I mean, so for me, I don't read self-help because I think that great literature, philosophy, that is self-help. I mean, I don't need anyone because I mean, I don't want to say I don't want to say that it's all bogus, right? Because I do think in some sense, there are some, I mean, it very much depends on the person, right? So I mean, I read philosophy. I'm not going to be inspired by someone who breaks down something in simple steps and tells me, what to do. It's not appealing to me in any way. So self-help is, in that sense, is not for me. I understand that, if you are looking for kind of a way maybe to structure a life or something, and someone does break things down very simply, then that can be a good thing. So I see why for some people it might be appealing, but for me, just I think my reading in itself is a sort of self-help, to the extent that, I mean, not self-help. I mean, I don't know. I mean, self-help implies that you need help, right? Um, I'm not really sure that I read because I think I need help. So in that sense, I don't read for self-help. But it's kind of, I mean, why do people read self-help books? I mean, I guess there's many reasons, but I would say that fundamentally it's about finding some sort of meaning or structure in their lives, right? For me, reading great literature, reading great philosophers. I mean, what more can you ask in terms of engaging with meaningful ways of seeing the world? Yeah.
But do you also think it's because you have studied psychology and you're a student of psychology? Do you think that could
Yeah.
be one of the reasons?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Just because, I mean, so I have a master's degree in social psychology, and I mean, I know how, I've conducted studies, I know how these are done. So, when you get a book that really just kind of cuts out all the scientific stuff and doesn't get into the technical things, but just gives you, the gist of it, then I mean, again, that's not very appealing to me, because I want to see how did they do the studies, what's the power of the studies, and so on and so on. So I'm not really the audience for that. Yeah.
I also like, so I used to only read literature when I was in school up until class 10. And
Mhm.
then after that is when I started trying more versatile stuff, if I may put it like that. What do you think is the worst thing about the contemporary literature? Or what do you think they get wrong? Like, I, for one, cannot read the new rom-coms that come out. I do not think the current age of authors, not a lot of them get romance right, or not a lot of them get satire right as well. What do you think is something that they can learn, or maybe what do you have a problem with them, and what is it?
Yeah, so I don't have a problem because with it, I mean, that's not the right way of putting it, because I don't really,
Yeah.
if there's something that I don't really care for, I just ignore it because I focus on the things that I do care about, right? But I do have an answer to your question, because it's a good question in terms of something maybe they get wrong or that's not appealing. So for me, if you read in the history of literature and you really trace it back, maybe you go back to, if you read Euripides, you read the ancient Greek playwrights, you find out that, a lot of ideas and subjects are just, they've been covered and discussed. And so, I mean, that can be kind of depressing in a sense, but it's also nice to see, which, I mean, it leads me to the next point, which is that I feel that there is this kind of idea among contemporary writers, or just, I mean, in general, even people just in general on social media or whatever, there's this idea that you have to be original, right? There's a sense that originality kind of trumps everything else. And people are, and it's related to this idea of individualism, of, finding yourself in your individuality, and so on and so on. But if you look at literature, and if you look at some of the greatest literature there is, if you look at someone like Dostoevsky, he was not writing to be, he didn't have in mind this idea of, I want to be an original writer, which I think so many kind of, if you're an up and coming writer, if you want to be a writer, I feel nowadays most people are, if you ask them what do you want to be considered as, well, original, like that's one thing that people really want to be, in a sense. But Dostoevsky, I mean, he took, like so many great writers, he was inspired by Gogol, he was inspired by Pushkin, he was inspired by Dickens. He engaged with them, sometimes copied their style in parts, wrote kind of experimental stories. In this, wrote The Double, for instance, which is very much, you could almost read it as a long story by Gogol, for instance. They're great because, not because they're original, but he's sort of adding something to something that he has found, and that he has found worthy to be built upon. And I feel like that sometimes gets lost a little bit in this desire to be original.
Yeah. What do you think of all the Instagram poetry that's coming in? While at one point, it's also really nice that internet is giving a lot of people the platform to express themselves. Does it also sometimes disappoint you? Are you someone who sticks to, say, I learned in Dead Poet Society, the meter and everything?
Yeah, so it's not so much, so to me, it's not so much about the meter. It's just, um, there's a kind of stereotypical Tumblr poem that is just, oh, I'm feeling this and that, and it's just kind of, spaced out in a way, right? And it's supposed to just draw attention to the feeling, which I don't care for at all, because to me, poetry has to be about thought as much as feeling, which is not necessarily related to meter, although meter can help. But a great poem doesn't just make you feel something, it makes you see something in a different way, it makes you think something about something else, maybe in a way you haven't thought about it before. And I feel like a lot of that Instagram poetry is just, and it gets applauded precisely because it's supposed to capture some kind of feeling that everyone has had. And it's this kind of idea that if it's relatable, then it's good, right? Which to me is sort of the opposite of what good poetry should be. Because to me, you read a poem and it's supposed to be weird and something out of this world, and what is this thing? Like, I'm trying to understand it, I don't get it, but let me read it again, let me find something in it, that kind of makes sense, and go from there. So that's, I think, how poetry should be. So for me, like that kind of sort of the stereotype that I just gave, I mean, of course there's kind of a range, maybe some of it is a little bit better than other. If people get something out of it, if you're going through like a breakup and you find something there, someone says, talks about how much they hurt or something, or you shouldn't let people walk all over you. I mean, then, who am I to, if people get something out of it, who am I to say anything about it? That's kind of my take on it.
But there are also like a lot of people who are trying to read poetry, but because of the because you need to work really on understanding poetry sometimes. So there's this meme where it says teacher told so the author wrote the curtains were blue, and the teacher said, oh, he says blue because he was feeling so and so and so. And then what the author actually meant was the curtains were blue. So sometimes what I have seen people go through is like they want to understand poetry and then they work so hard on understanding it that they just kind
Yeah,
of lose interest in the process. So what
yeah.
would you recommend is the best way to read poetry?
Yeah, so that's kind of, yeah, this scholastic way of, studying and studying. Yeah, I mean, so I suppose if you want, so there's a difference, or there should be a difference between, reading poetry just because you want to read poetry, right? And studying poetry. I mean, those are two different things. And, there's criticism and so on and so on. If you really want to get involved in that, I don't think you can avoid, really approaching it as a text and dissecting it and looking at the literary tradition and the allusions and so on and so on. But if you just want to read it, I mean, just forget everything. And I have the same advice, when you want to read a big book that is very daunting. Don't think about it, just start reading it, right? I mean, just start reading the Brothers Karamazov. If you're going to find that, you're going to get drawn into it, right? It's not, it's not scary or anything like that. I recently read War and Peace, for instance, which I've been putting off because it was the big work of Tolstoy. I read his other things first, and I've been kind of building up to that. And I mean that's one of the biggest books there is, and it's kind of even now it's huge, but kind of like this is going to take a lot of time, and you just kind of start. And I feel the same approach to poetry is going to work. If you have to be interested in someone to some extent if you're going to read their poetry, right?
Right.
So find someone who you find somewhat interesting. You're like, oh, this person seems kind of cool, or so, like had an interesting life. Let me read their poetry. And I think that's a good way to approach it.
Yeah. Do you also, is there any, like you mentioned, like War and Peace has a long, I don't know, is long. Like, do you, like, I get very, like, I have started picking up books like, hey, it seems a little too long. I think it'll take me more than a week to finish it. So I just avoid picking up those up.
Mhm.
Does it happen to you as well? Like, apart from War and Peace, has it ever happened to you where you're still
No.
not picking up something because you're like, hey, it's a little too long?
No and yes. Actually, so yeah, so I did wait to read War and Peace actually because I was going through a very busy time like with my PhD, and it didn't feel like the right time to read it because I knew I would be investing a lot in it. But no, in the sense of, so maybe this kind of ties back, you brought up Instagram and stuff, because Instagram has kind of become a sad business in a sense for people who want to be influencers and so on. It kind of discourages people to read long books, right? Because to the extent that you want to post new content regularly, right? Are you going to read a book that's 50 pages and has a pretty cover, or like 100 pages has, or are you going to read a book that's 1,000 pages and it's going to mean that, you know, you're not going to be able to post anything really new for the coming month. So that's something that I think goes unsaid sometimes. I mean, those are kind of the nuances, and that's the business of Instagram, which, you know, I don't necessarily like, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you also read history?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Are there any like books that you think nobody talks about and everyone should be reading them?
I mean, there's the open veins of Latin America. Wait, let me double check the title before I say so. By Eduardo Galeano, Open Veins of Latin America. Yeah, that's the title. I don't want to give any. Don't want to be responsible for any misinformation, although I'm sure you can find it. That's it's about, so he's a brilliant writer and poet, scholar, and so on, Eduardo Galeano. And it's kind of a history of Latin America, and it's very compelling. And when I read it, it made a really big impression on me. I know it's not, so it's not necessarily a book that no one knows about. I'm sure if you're from Latin America, I mean, you'll
Mm.
definitely know it. But if you're not, you know, then you'll find something in there that's really worth finding. Yeah.
Okay. And have you read any books on Asia as well, like in terms of history or mythology?
Yeah, so I recently, so they're here. So there's I mean, I got into Japanese philosophy recently. So I you know, I bought two books on, like, a source book of all the classic texts. You know, I'm very sort of systematic and method, methodological in these things, and I want to start at the beginning and read everything, you know. So then I go right to the beginning, and I pick up a book like that. Yeah, so I mean, I lived in the Philippines, so I'm very interested in Filipino history. I don't read it as much as I should. Really, I always want to know a lot more. But, you know, there's so many things to read that it's kind of impossible to read exhaustively within any given area. But yeah, so I mean, I lived in China as well. I'm interested in Chinese history. Basically, the places where I lived, I'm especially
Yeah.
interested. Yeah.
Are there also like okay, are there also like so when you're discovering something new, what
Mhm.
like how do you go about it? What's your methodology for it? Like first, so for example, when I'm discovering a new author, I start with
Mhm.
short stories or maybe a like never poetry, but like short stories, and then I move on to
Yeah.
like bigger volumes.
Um, so I'm kind of, I mean,
It's
I'm kind of
something.
idiosyncratic. Oh,
Sorry, that was my Alexa. I'm really sorry.
oh,
That
that's okay. Do you need to answer or something or do
no, no,
something
no, no,
or
no. It's all
no?
good.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm kind of idiosyncratic in the sense that I don't, maybe this is also related to the so popular. So I often don't start with like an author's most famous work. I just kind of find something a little bit more obscure and go with that just because it's interesting to me. Um, so that's something that I do. In terms of sort of methodology of reading new things, I mean, I read up on it, I read about it, and then I kind of just find what is most appealing to me at the moment. And this actually, I mean, I don't know if you want to ask me something else. I mean, I can go on about this, but maybe related to something that we talked about before that I can say um, about advice for people who want to read something. It's just a small point. Yeah. No, but I mean, so I think it's very important to kind of be aware of your own mood at a time when you start to read something. I'm very much someone who will, you know, walk around the house, like go through my shelves and kind of pick something that in the moment feels sort of right to read, that I want to read. It could be something as simple as just an author, favorite author. I'm like, yeah, now I'm going to read this work. Or maybe it's something I haven't read before. I kind of read the back cover. I'm like, okay, yeah, now, I mean, now it's time I want to read this. So I'm kind of like that. I mean, I'm not really strict with anything in that sense. And I think that's important as well if you want to read something. I mean, the most important thing is just you need to have the interest, right? Because if you're not interested in something, why would you even read it?
Right.
Yeah.
What do you have to say to people who say that, hey, we don't have time to read?
Well, again, I wouldn't really say anything to them because unless they tell me that they want to read but they don't have time, because I mean, if you don't have time to read and you don't want to read, that's fine, right? I
But
also
if you don't
think
have time to read and you want to read, then what
and
about
you want to read, yeah. I mean, again, I would go back to the advice of, make it I mean, so there's like in psychology of, implementation intentions, that you sort of set yourself times when you're going to do something in advance, and then and with the reminder so that you stick to it. That's a good way to do it. Maybe, put the, if you decide that you want to read before you sleep, put the book on your pillow, so you can't avoid it, kind of thing. Maybe remind yourself, create moments where you can easily read, because it is easy to give in when you're tired after a long day and think, I'll watch television, Netflix, whatever, because I'm tired and I'll read tomorrow, I'll start reading tomorrow. But you can go on like that, and in the end you don't end up reading.
Nice. Do you watch Netflix?
I do. I do, but for me it's kind of like um a way, like it's almost cathartic in a sense, like as a way to unwind. Like I watch it usually with my meals, especially if I'm here at home working, and I just watch, funny stupid shows as a way to kind of unwind and have something silly, because I mean, yeah, most of the day I'm reading very serious things. I'm, writing and, doing other things. So it's just kind of way it's a way for me to, and I have nothing, I have nothing against silly entertainment. I think it can be important. It's only problematic if that's kind of all you end up doing, right? And
Yeah.
especially if then you kind of feel like your life becomes empty, or you would really rather be doing something more meaningful with your time. That's when it starts to become a problem, But yeah.
What are some of the TV shows that are your favorite on Netflix?
I mean, so Friends, I grew up with Friends, and How I Met Your Mother. I've been watching now, so Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is actually I find pretty funny at times. Again, though, just those kind of silly show. I mean, The Office. I mean, I think this I'm pretty standard when it comes to those shows, right? Like I don't have
Yeah.
any kind of interesting obscure shows, and yeah.
I also want to get to your book recommendations, but I really have a question because I think you used a word that just reminded me of this.
Hmm.
How do you feel about authors getting cancelled and people deciding not to read them anymore? Like, an incident happened with me a few weeks ago.
Hmm.
I recommended a short story by Woody Allen, and someone just called me out, like, how can you talk about this person? He's very problematic. And
Yeah.
how do you feel when authors get cancelled, or like your favorite authors get cancelled for maybe because at the time when they were writing they were a little racist, and now today they're being cancelled. Roald Dahl is getting cancelled every, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fun. I would say I'm fundamentally opposed to canceling. I mean, I do think in it. So let me put it in two ways. So there's a matter of reading, personal reading, right? And there's a matter of curriculum. And I do think that when something is on a school curriculum, especially in a democratic setting, right, there should be some room for negotiation about the class or whatever. If there is like opposition to something and it's considered racist or whatever, there should be discussion there, right? But that to me is different from reading things personally. There I would say everyone has absolute freedom to read whatever they want. Sure, people can think things about it, and it can be tough to kind of respond. You have to be strong, right? You have to be a secure person, because it's easy to kind of give in, and we see a lot of that. Right, as soon as people start saying, oh, why are you reading this? I mean, people are very quick to apologize and so on. um, I don't know. I mean, I don't think in the long run canceling is something that is necessarily good, because I think people vastly underestimate what can be learned from people who have very different viewpoints. I mean, obviously, if someone is going to give a talk that's overtly racist, that's different from someone who has a character in a book who says something that some people consider racist. Well, I mean, that's very different to me. And people, I mean, some of this gets blown way out of proportion, and it becomes yeah, kind of witch hunt in a sense, which it's interesting if you read history and if you read the
Yeah.
books that were banned before, that were controversial before, you usually find that all of it is just vindicated through time, right? I mean, when people were outraged at particular books at the time, well, later it turns out that we actually consider it to be a classic. Of course, now we're going through a period where people are way more critical, and we'll just have to see what happens there.
Right. Like, it's ridiculous when they cancel like people who are dead, and because it really can't hurt,
But they
harm them.
can't, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
they can, but they still cancel them. But what
yeah.
about the people who are still very relevant? Do you think that's justified? Or like, what other way would you recommend they get punished? Okay, there's law, but like, is there a th way to separate the art from the artist? And do you think it's the right thing to do?
I mean,
Especially when someone is
definitely.
very relevant.
So definitely you separate the art from the artist. I mean, I mean, hopefully that's what most people do. Most people who can think about things, right, who have an imagination. Sometimes it's very important to have very bad people in literature, right, to see it as bad and to kind of learn from it. In terms of, so what I guess the argument that people often give, oh, you shouldn't give them a platform because they shouldn't profit from this, right? But that's actually interesting because the people who say that, they're very free not to pay for any of it, right? So they're not giving any money, but then they also want other people not to, they're basically restricting they want to restrict what other people, the freedom of other people to be able to pay for what they want to pay for. So, and that to me is problematic. I mean, you get into, because it's fine to condemn things, right? Like we have social media, you can say, oh, well, actually this text is problematic for these reasons. But once you start to, basically say this person shouldn't have a livelihood, I mean, then that's when you get a very tricky territory. Or when you say other people shouldn't be able to like, freely, spend the money that they work to get, to, go to a lecture by this person because they're interested. To me, that's going too far. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'll get to your book recommendations now.
It's
So,
fine. I mean, we can,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any books that you'd like to recommend that are your favorites? Yeah.
Um,
Wait, I
I
will ask you the most important question that I haven't asked you. Like, this is the question we start with, but I forgot to ask you. What are you reading right now?
That's a good question. What am I reading right now? I mean, I'm reading several things, but what I'm reading right now, like I guess the main thing is Dialogue with Death, which is a book by Arthur Koestler, and it's about the time he was captured by Franco's forces in the Spanish Civil War, and he spent 3 months in prison, thinking that he was going to get executed, but he was sort of reprieved at the last moment. And yeah, so he wrote about it, basically that whole experience.
Yeah.
But maybe I can recommend, so he has a book, Darkness at Noon, which is a piece of fiction. A little bit dark. It's also about awaiting execution in a cell. It's about totalitarianism and so on. But it's very good. I mean, it's one of those that yeah, it's if you're interested in that strand of literature, especially engaging with totalitarianism, and then that's definitely one to read.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah, which brings us back to the canceling, right? Yeah, yeah.
But like, what would you like to recommend to the people who are watching right now? Your favorite books or anything in general?
Yeah, I mean that should it's a very difficult difficult question because again, so my recommendations always take into account the personality and the person in front of me. So a general advice is I just feel like it's difficult to give. But I have, so Anneke van is a writer who's not very well known. And I think her writing is amazing and she deserves much more recognition than she does. So I would say Anneke van, her novel Ice is probably the most popular out of the things she's written. Um, Very interesting. You can read sort of climate if you want. Thoughts about climate change in it, but also, kind of there's, a question of drug use because she used heroin. So, I mean, there's lots of things to be read in it. And it's just a very intriguing novel. Yeah.
Right. And do you also have any, I know like you prepared a favorite passage of yours also for us. So,
Yes, so I actually, thanks for the reminder. So this is from a different work by Annika Von. I can show, I don't know if how well you're going to be able to see it. It's called Asylum Piece. Again, I mean, so my taste for literature tends to go a little bit towards the dark, existential, psychological side of things, which is not really surprising, I suppose. But not everyone is going to appreciate it as much, which I understand. Let me see. So I'll read the passage, right? Uh, Probably capturing what I just said. So, I mean, so this is a moment where the protagonist is kind of standing in her yard and looking at the birds outside in the garden, which are meaningful to her, and she's kind of reflecting. And she says, or well, Kavan writes, a human being can only endure depression up to a certain point. When this point of saturation is reached, it becomes necessary for him to discover some element of pleasure, no matter how humble or on how low a level, in his environment if he is to go on living at all. In my case, these insignificant birds with their subdued colorings have provided just sufficient distraction to keep me from total despair. Each day, I find myself spending longer and longer at the window watching their flights, their quarrels, their mouse quick flutterings, their miniature feuds and alliances. Curiously enough, it is only when I'm standing in front of the window that I feel any sense of security. While I am watching the birds, I believe that I am comparatively immune from the assaults of life. The very indifference to humanity of these wild creatures affords me certain safeguard. Where all else is dangerous, hostile, and liable to inflict pain, they alone can do me no injury because probably they are not even aware of my existence. The birds are at once my refuge and my relaxation.
this was nice. Yeah,
Also tying in with some themes that we already talked about, right? So it's actually quite a
right.
good yeah,
Do you
passage.
also have a, like I asked you, like, do you have a Goodreads account? How seriously
I
do you take the Goodreads rating?
do. I mean, I just rate it basically for myself. I use Goodreads for myself to keep track. Um, I mean, the rating is meaningless, right? Like everyone knows that. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess the only thing, 1 star and 5 star maybe are a bit meaningful because you're kind of, if this is horrible, that's, maybe 1 star. It should be 0 stars maybe. And maybe 5 stars, it's amazing. But it also depends on who's doing the rating, right? If you have someone who, gives 5 stars to almost everything, it's like, well, they're not really discerning. So how much should you really value their 5 stars? Maybe someone who's very critical is going to give 5 stars and it's going to be much more meaningful. As an aggregate, for popular books, it just tells you how many people rated it highly.
Yeah.
That's all it tells you. I mean, it tells you nothing about the quality unless you take a whole bunch of people you don't know as a measure of quality, of course, which I guess we do to some extent, but yeah.
How do you rate your books? Like, what decides that this book is going to get 1 star, this is going to get 2 stars, and this is going to get 3 or 4 or 5 stars?
um, so I guess in a general way, but also I'm kind of so just general. How much did I appreciate it? How good was it? How much did I enjoy it? Those all kind of come together. But also because I read so many books by the same author, because I love to read sort of the bodies of work of all my favorite writers. I also start to do kind of a comparison among their works. So a book by P.G. Woodhouse, who is one of my favorite sort of lighter reads, who kind of gets me through things. He's very funny and very nice to read. A book that I'll give 2 stars is still going to be better probably than a lot of literature out there, especially popular literature, no offense. Um, but among his works, I don't think it's one of his best, right? So that's why I give it maybe 2 or 3 stars. Um, so it tells you something comparative. Of course, I know that people who read my reviews don't, but I try to at least give a little bit of a context to it so that people also understand why I'm giving it 2 stars, I suppose. Yeah.
Nice. Do you also, like, before we go, do you also listen to music?
I also listen to music, yes. In fact, I do a lot. I mean, especially when I'm out walking, when I'm working as well. I mean, when I'm writing, I always have music on. I mean, I have kind of a strange taste, I suppose. I mean, I have different kinds of music that I listen to also. I mean, I guess everyone does, but mostly it's sort of, I've always loved hip hop, like underground hip hop. I guess it ties in with the whole poetry thing. You know, very good hip hop is also poetry. Um, and so I listen to that not while I'm working. While I'm working, I have more, you know, kind of voice, like stuff without distracting voices, right? So maybe jazz or even just stuff like, you know, deep house, that kind of chill out stuff. 90s trance is really good. I mean, you know, in the 90s, I was there, and I appreciated the trance at a certain point. So it's also nostalgic, and yeah. So I mean, I listen to a bunch of stuff, and I have Spotify, and I'll see what's going on there every once in a while. Yeah.
Right. Do you have any recommendations for people that you'd say, ki, hey, you should check out this artist?
I mean, yeah. If you like hip hop or rap, then Aesop Rock is one of my favorites. But that's Aesop, AESOP Rock. So not Aesop Rocky, was someone else who became very popular after Aesop Rock. So that's someone very eclectic, sort of like unique style, but I mean one of the greatest ever. Um, let's see, who else can I don't know. Wait, let me actually, I'll have a look at my Spotify. Let's see what I recently added. I might as well to see what I've really appreciated. I mean, there's the new Nas album. That's good. I mean, he's always great. Let's see if I have, I mean, so there's this artist. I mean, if you're kind of into more um, kind of moody hip hop, I would say, but that's also kind of just nice to listen to, kind of atmospheric, and there's good lyrics, and sadistic is also someone I really like. He has a new album, and Limerence is a song I really appreciate. So that's someone to check out. Yeah, that's about it. On a completely different note, sorry, one more I'll give it as a recommendation. Martin Garrix. I mean, he's a DJ, a Dutch DJ, right? So I mean, he has like a lot of club music and stuff, but he came out with this kind of very different song called Pressure with Tove Lo. I don't really know how to pronounce it. Sorry, Tove, if it's not correct. But it's kind of a very different style. And it's a great song, but I love that he kind of just took the chance and did something very different. Because if you're at sort of a high level of fame, which he is, it's very difficult to come up with something that's very different to what you do, because people are expecting you to do the same thing,
Yeah.
right? Which ironically is against what artists are supposed to do, because they're supposed to kind of continually, you know, reinvent, renew, you know, do different things, create different kinds of meaning, right? But people expect them to do the same thing because that's what we like, that's what we're used to. So kind of, he's sort of a young guy, and to come up with a song that's very different from what he did, I think it's cool and it's worth noting, and it's a good song. Yeah,
Great. Before we go, and this is my last question to you,
sure.
is do you have any writing advice for people who are just trying to get into writing?
Yeah. So so part of that, so the first advice is to sort of discover yourself and your writing style, right? Are you someone who needs structure? If you do, if you feel like you do, set times for yourself to be writing and do that, stick to it. If you're someone, and I'm more like that, who sort of relies on inspiration, and when I feel like writing, that can only sort of work against you if you really force yourself to try to write when you don't feel like it. So if you're more inclined, then, you know, give in to when you feel like writing, and stretch it for as long as you can while you feel inspiration. I do think in general, if you really want to write and you're serious about it, it's good to have some kind of structure and a schedule, right? So if you realize, you know, maybe in the morning you feel very kind of fresh and motivated, then, you know, set yourself time in the morning to write, maybe just an hour. If, you know, on the other hand, maybe you're a night owl and you're like, well, you know, after midnight, that's really when I thrive, then, you know, set some time after midnight, you know, even just an hour.
And
Yeah.
how important should validation be? How important should opinion of others be then for you when you're writing?
I mean, I guess my whole spiel here has been validation is not important at all. I mean, of
But
course,
what
validation
if
is
someone is
important, but
writing something really bad and then like how do
no.
you
So yeah, so validation is important, but validation is important from important people, right? People who you respect and who you think can genuinely give you some good advice. So if you're an academic, maybe there's someone in your department or someone who can look at your work, and you'll know they're going to look at it and give you good advice. If you're an up and coming writer, reach out to someone who's a writer, maybe ask them for advice. I don't know. I mean, in general, getting feedback is a really good thing. I think people should do that more often. I think if you get, it's a pitfall to try and to think that you don't. I mean, everyone needs editing and needs second looks at things. So, I mean, don't think that you don't need that. But on the other hand, kind of stand firm in terms of what you want to do with the writing, and don't be dissuaded very easily with advice. Use what you think is going to make it better, genuinely, and discard what you think is not that good in terms of advice.
Nice.
Yeah.
And yeah, before we go, like, is there something that you'd like to talk about?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm still thinking about things we talked about. I always have, when I'm talking about things we're thinking about, it kind of just keeps running in the background. In terms of what we talked about, if I have anything more to say, I mean, I don't really have any additional things. I mean, people ask me things, and they're free to ask me things, on Instagram. So if anyone, I don't know, I'm thinking of the listeners now. If anyone has questions, I mean, I'm happy to respond. I try to respond. I mean, it's not always possible to respond quickly, but I do my best to kind of give everyone an answer.
I
So
think there
yeah,
was
maybe.
one question that was pretty interesting.
Mhm.
Someone had Akash Das had asked, like, "Hey Steven, which of the two
Yeah.
Instagram profiles is more close to your heart?" I think he was talking about Blackout Literature and your account.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Probably the original one, just because I don't know when I started it, and I think it was 2013, maybe, something like that. And it's really funny because I didn't know about Bookstagram or anything like that, right? So my first picture was a picture of 3 new books that I got. I don't remember. I was thinking about it the other day. One of them was St. Augustine's Confessions. I think another one was a book by Conrad, Joseph Conrad. I don't know. I don't remember the third one. I'll have to go back. But it was just, and it was kind of, after that, I discovered that there was this thing, that people post about books, but it was kind of like, I don't know, it was sort of I feel, looking back at it, it was kind of an innocent move to post pictures of books, going into Instagram as my first sort of picture. It could have been something else, picture of my cat. I mean, but it was books, and my account ended up, I persisted, and I kept posting books, and it is what it is now. So I guess in that sense, there's more of a story to my original account. But secretly, I do very much like the other one, and yeah.
Yeah. The Leisper is also asking, who are your favorite authors?
Yeah, so I mean, Dostoevsky is definitely one of them. Um, Anneke van, who I talked about, Kafka, Thomas Bernhard, love the Brontes. Um, I mean, Turgenev. I mean, all this. So I mean, I could start listing Russians. I'm trying to think of, so who are Thomas Mann is another one who's very dear to me. Dr. Faustus, if you haven't read it, I mean, that's an amazing novel. Not an easy novel to read, but it's a brilliant one. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just one another question by Niranjan Naval. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Niranjan. He's asking if there are any movies that you loved watching recently.
I have to say that recently I haven't actually watched any movies, because movies. So I don't really watch movies. Really only so when my girlfriend, with my girlfriend, I like to watch movies, but just like by myself, and I don't know. So lately I've just been sort of working from home, and I haven't really had the chance to do it. So I kind of rely on television shows. But I'm thinking now, I don't even remember what the last movie is that I watched. Um, so that
Okay,
that's got me stumped. Yeah. Um,
that's
I mean, I
absolutely
know. Sorry.
that's absolutely all right if you can't think of any movie that you've seen recently.
Well, I can tell you that recently I told myself that I was going to watch the Godfather. trilogy again, because I saw it was on Amazon Prime, which I have. So I said, at some point I'm going to watch them all. So
Yeah.
there, I was excited to do that. So that might be my answer then.
There's another very interesting question, I think. Dileswari has asked, and this is something I'd like to know as well. Like, what are your favorite books that feature cats?
Um, oh, I just read an amazing one called The Guest Cat. But now, so what was the name of it was the first book I read by them, Takashi Hiaida. It's actually a contemporary work, so I do sometimes read contemporary, but I have to say it's because it's by one of my favorite publishers, New Directions, that I discovered the book. So The Guest Cat, it's really, really beautiful. It's one, I mean, I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, and I'm not super critical on Goodreads, but a 5 star does mean, I think it's great. So yeah,
Nice.
that it was touching and very
Nice.
meaningful. Yeah.
And Sakib is asking if you follow any Indian authors or books.
Um, I mean, I don't think I follow any authors, to be honest. Is it so on Instagram or just in general?
In general, have you read any Indian authors or books?
Um, I'm thinking of it now. So that's actually one area that I have a lot left to read, in terms of geographic location. What is this name? So I have there's this book that I wanted to read a while ago, um, but now it was a book by Vikram Seth. I hope I'm pronouncing that
I can
correctly.
say it, yes.
Vikram Seth. Yeah, that was. But I'm trying to think of which book it was. Anyway, so I have to admit that's definitely an area where I'm not particularly well read.
Mhm.
Um, and but I'm trying to think if there was one particular, because I'm like that. I don't. So sometimes I'm interested in an author, but more often, an Equal Music. That's the one, and I have a copy actually. So it was one that an Equal Music. Yeah. So
Yeah.
sometimes, but usually I'm interested not so much in an author, but in a particular book, and I have to come across it. So yeah,
Nice.
that's the one. Yeah.
There's also
So
one more question. I'm so sorry I cut you off. You were saying something. Yeah.
no, I was just going to ask if someone wants to, give me one, the greatest Indian novel by an Indian writer,
Mm.
for instance.
That's actually a book as well, The Greatest Indian Novel. But guys, if you are watching this and if you'd like to recommend any books by Indian authors, you can mention that in the comments. And Generic User 99 is asking you about historical fiction. Do you have any recommendations in terms of historical fiction?
Um, so in general, I'm not a big fan of historical fiction. So, but there are exceptions. I'm trying to think now. Um, what is something that I recently read in terms of historical? Um, I mean, there's something that I was very interested in, and actually, I think the book is going to be delivered today. It's a book that I ordered. Let me look it up for you here now. It's by an author, a Serbian author, whom I had not read before. It's called Death and the Dervish by
Okay.
Mesa Selimovic. So that's an historical novel, and also another one that he wrote as well. I was very interested in. I will be reading those in the near future. I could, on Goodreads, I'll probably write a review. I'm thinking now, historical novels. Yeah, it's not really a genre I like too much, but I do know, I can't think of them now, but I do know
Yeah.
there are a couple of notable exceptions. Maybe I'll comment them if I think of them, because I know that later on I'm going to think of them. I'll write it in the comments.
Nice. That's amazing. So that was all I had, but yeah. So thank you so much for doing this, Stephen.
Thanks
And
so much for having me.
there were a lot of fans of yours as well who follow, I think, you on Instagram, and they said ki, they were excited to see you here. But thank you so much for
That's
doing
great.
this.
Hi
And
everyone.
yeah. And I know you have to be somewhere, so I won't waste much of your time. I
uh,
will also end the stream from the back end. So we'll see you guys tomorrow and for the Friday night stream and I hope all of you have a lovely evening. And thank you, Stephen, for
yes,
doing this.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.